This young woman continues to go from strength to strength. Then I did communicate with her and her mother over the weekend to congratulate her and express to her mother the pride that's felt by so many Bermudians. In her speech in London, Ms. Tuckett spoke about a throne speech initiative from 2020, Bermuda's National Youth Policy. The government delivered on that promise by launching the National Youth Policy in 2021, and Ms. Tuckett is an active participant in the National Youth Policy Working Group. To meet the challenges that confront Bermuda, the government has set out a clear legislative path that touches all aspects of our society. The actions to be undertaken in this parliamentary session support our economic recovery plan, continue the assistance we must provide to most vulnerable, and build on the foundation already laid for making our systems more just. The increase in the amount of the child care benefit and the expansion of the pool of parents eligible to receive it comes as a direct result of listening and responding to a critical need among Bermuda's working population. The cost of childcare has risen along with other costs, and as parents work to provide for their families and play their part in this island's economy, this deliberate action on the part of the government is what is required at this time. A tremendous amount of work lies ahead, and across every ministry, there is a focus on delivering what we promise the people of Bermuda. Promises which won their strong endorsement of our policies and programs just over 2 years ago at the ballot box. Over the next 2 weeks, ministers will take the time to outline for the media and the people of Bermuda updates on the progress of initiatives in last year's throne speech and provide additional details on the work proposed for this legislative year. Legislation, whether new bills or amendments to existing acts, is one of the principal ways that we can deliver change for the people of Bermuda. MPs and senators are representatives, but we are principally legislators. The government is determined to advance a legislative agenda that gives statutory authority and a reality to the mandate provided to this government by the people of Bermuda. As I turn now to address matters related to the Ministry of Finance, the legislative goals for the ministry mirror those of the government as a whole. Streamline processes for residents and businesses, promote equity in financial markets and the treatment of working people, and to create the conditions for job creation and continued economic growth. Significant work has been done to advance the government's commitments to reduce interest rates and to address issues related to bank fees as outlined in previous throne speeches. In the first phase, a number of discussions were held with local banks to encourage them to take action in this area voluntarily. I am also pleased to see that certain banks have now changed their approach to credit card over-limit fees, with such fees only being charged once if the customer breaches its authorized limit, rather than imposing multiple charges in the same period. Other fees have been reduced or eliminated, particularly in relation to seniors. In addition, one of Bermuda's major banks is now reviewing its approach to establishing Mortgage Rates Bermuda to evaluate opportunities for further reduction of rates charged to residents. This review is a direct result of discussions with the government and senior bank officials having oversight responsibilities for banking operations in Bermuda. In this current interest rate environment, where the US Federal Reserve Bank just this year has increased rates by over 3%, causing local banks to increase their rates, with one local bank this year alone increasing their base lending rate by 1.5%. It is important for the government to advance initiatives to cushion the impact of global increases of interest rates on residents. The recently announced Mortgage Guarantee Program is an initiative which allows eligible persons to get discounted mortgage rates on the basis of a portion of their mortgage being supported by a government guarantee. This program also speaks to the government's commitment to building a nation of owners, as the first of 3 phases of the program is open to first-time homeowners, and the subsequent phases will be open to persons seeking to refinance existing mortgages. With a guarantee commitment of $50 million, this will allow for approximately 250 persons to benefit. But it must also be emphasized that this mortgage guarantee program is a pilot program, And work has already commenced on the broader program that will allow for international business, local banks, and the government to collaborate on a structure that will allow greater participation and greater reduction in mortgage rates across the country. To further ensure that customers' rights are protected, amendments were made in the last session to the Banks and Deposits Company Act to allow for a banking code of conduct to be developed and issued. This will allow for conduct issues to be taken into account in monitoring and enforcing compliance with regulatory requirements. The Bermuda Monetary Authority has completed the necessary steps to finalize the codes and will continue its work to progress the rules on banking fees. All of this work highlights the priority the government gives to the protection of consumers, to reducing the cost of financial services to the customer, and to the promotion and support of Bermudians in achieving their goal of home ownership. In the 2021 throne speech, in addition to conduct measures for banks that I just mentioned, the speech pledged that the government would, and I quote, look to protect consumers by reducing the fees charged by service providers to residents with private pensions, end quote. By way of update, the Pension Commission has undertaken a review of the fee charges and fee structures in Bermuda by third-party pension plan administrators in their financial institution pension plans established and operated under the National Pension Scheme. The Commission has had initial discussions with members of its advisory committee on the findings of the review. The advisory committee is made up of representatives from plan administrators, unions, employers, the international business sector, and legal and accounting firms. It is recognized that pension plan administrators have, over the years since the introduction of the National Pension Scheme in 2000, voluntarily undertaken to reduce fees incurred by pension plans and their members. However, in comparison to international standards and the significant impact fees have on the long-term value of pension benefits, the government recognized that additional reductions in fees should be advanced. Further discussions will be held with the Commission's advisory committee in order to make recommendations to the Commission, which will in turn provide advice to the Ministry of Finance on opportunities and specific approaches to make further cost savings for plan members and their beneficiaries. It is anticipated that the Commission will provide its advice and recommendations early in 2023, and is the intention of the government to advance those changes during the budget session next year. The government has committed to implementing a prudent and well-considered fiscal and economic strategy. The work done in this area has been positively assessed by international ratings agencies, investors, and other independent experts. This strategy includes initiatives to increase revenue while also appropriately controlling expenditures, with a view to make sure that we are also appropriately managing the country's debt. This well-developed strategy is being applied to the government's oversight of its various quangos. There is now an even greater focus on ensuring that there is effective governance of these entities, carried out by persons with the appropriate skills and expertise to fulfill the responsibilities, and that compensation levels are consistent with the nature and scope of the work of the quango. The Ministry of Finance has worked with quangos to achieve better financial accountability and ensure that these entities are operating in as cost-effective a manner as possible. Definitive steps have already been taken to assure that these entities are providing good value for money that has been entrusted to them and have the appropriate level of oversight. Participation in board discussions and review of annual work plans or budgets, as well as the assessment of structures, is now being undertaken to even greater level of detail than before, and the benefits of such actions are already evident. Reductions in financing costs and other overheads in various quangos have already been experienced. One such example is the decision to merge WEDCO and BLDC, as mentioned in the throne speech, which was delivered on Friday, and the appropriate legislation to effect this merger, which will be presented in Parliament during the session. This was the result of significant analysis and assessment, and similar work is being done in relation to other quangos to determine how and to what extent consolidation can improve effectiveness, create further efficiencies, and provide better value for the taxpayers of Bermuda. The government has also been working to address a long-standing problem, namely the significant unfunded liabilities in Bermuda's two main pension funds, the Contributory Pension Fund, better known as the CPF, and the Public Sector Superannuation Fund, better known as the PSSF. Using the services of an independent firm with considerable expertise in this area, as well as actuarial consultants for the funds, options to increase the contributions and/or more effectively manage the benefits are under review, and discussions to ensure the long-term sustainability of the funds have been held over the past 2 years. In addition, steps are being taken to progress a critical aspect of this reform, which will reflect this government's commitment to a fairer, more equitable society and bring Bermuda's social insurance system in line with other countries around the world. In relation to social insurance contributions, it is intended that contributions will be changed from the current fixed rate for all persons, regardless of income, to one that mirrors other countries in the world where social insurance contributions are paid as a percentage of earnings. The effect of this change would be to increase the take-home pay of low-wage earners, while having high-wage earners pay more into the fund. Changes resulting from this work will be revenue accretive to the Contributory Pension Fund, which will help to address the underfunded nature of the pension plans. It is anticipated that the relevant legislative amendments to address this issue and to address the problem of underfunding of these pension funds will be enacted during this legislative session. As highlighted already, this government recognized the importance of ensuring effectiveness and efficiency as part of its fiscal and economic strategy. However, it is realized that further streamlining is necessary to enhance Bermuda's competitiveness and promote greater efficiency under the Companies Act 1981. As licensing and regulatory requirements in other areas have been put into place or strengthened, there has been limited evaluation of the related corporate approvals that are under the Companies Act to determine if they are still relevant or required. A detailed review of the Companies Act and the permissions that are required by the Minister of Finance under the Companies Act has been completed. Specifically, the need for continued ministerial approval for proposed actions and transactions. By way of example, the approval of the Minister of Finance is required to approve the establishment of a range of businesses, including those in the health field, legal field, accounting field. All of these are where there are additional licensing requirements for other administrative bodies that are already in place. Streamlining the approval process of a number of areas is expected to be a very positive step for Bermuda, facilitating greater ministerial focus on policy and strategy, and potentially reducing the cost of doing business, creating savings for the government and increasing the attractiveness of the jurisdiction as a place to do business. By way of another example, if companies want to sublease their property or lease their property, they have to go to a lawyer to apply for permission to the Minister of Finance in order to go ahead and do these leases. These are things that are rather antiquated in a 40-year-old act, which will be updated because that is not the way that we want to do efficient business in Bermuda. And if we're going to focus on reducing the cost of business to local companies and also international companies, these are the streamlining efforts that we can make happen inside of the Companies Act. Moving on to Morgan's point. The ongoing actions to address the problems resulting from the structure and inadequate resources put in place support the guarantee given to the Morgan's Point project by the former government have been extensive. The government to date, and not the government, I should say the taxpayers of this country to date, have had to invest considerable resources, human and financial, and over $210 million to date in this project due to the failure of this project and the calling of this guarantee. Approvals have been given by the cabinet for the establishment of a new company, which will be modeled after the Bermuda Land Development Company, to progress a plan to return as much value as possible to the government of Bermuda while providing appropriate benefits to the people of Bermuda. And the most important benefit is getting as much of the funds that have been expended back. Legislation to progress the establishment of this company will be progressed as a matter of priority in this session. And as the throne speech mentioned, the Morgan's Point Act 2014 will be officially repealed. Moving forward, the government has already demonstrated its commitment to providing support and assistance to the people of Bermuda in mitigating the impact of rising global inflation. The measures of which were outlined previously, which were passed in the last session, in regarding the duty reductions for essential goods, have been brought into force. The throne speech did mention that the monitoring process under the Cost of Living Commission, which we brought forward by the Attorney General, Minister of Legislative Affairs, to advance the monitoring process. But there is another step that was promised in September, which the Ministry of Finance will deliver on during this legislative session. That was a promised review of the sugar tax. And the government is currently reviewing the application of the sugar tax with a view to reducing the number of goods that are subject to the sugar tax. In our meetings with importers and with retailers, there was a discussion about the wide range of products that the sugar tax is now currently applicable to, and the Ministry of Finance is working with the Ministry of Health on narrowing the application of the sugar tax to, in a ways, look to provide additional relief while not going against the main purpose of the sugar tax, which was to reduce the consumption of sugary items to have long-term benefits for healthcare, as we do know that we have severe issues with chronic disease in Bermuda, specifically those of diabetes. Those are the matters that were mentioned by the Ministry of Finance during the throne speech. And I'll now hand it over to the Minister of Education to speak to the education matters that were contained in the throne speech. And I am very pleased that he'll be discussing the promises that the government has laid out, the promises that the government is going to deliver, specifically on the issue of advancing education reform, advancing the educational authority, and advancing the parish primary schools. Minister of Education.
Thank you, Premier, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to echo the Premier's comments by also acknowledging the incredible accomplishment by Ms. Mackenzie Cole-Tuckett, a 2021 Ministry of Education scholarship recipient who spoke in the House of Commons in London on Friday. Ms. Tuckett is a role model for all young Bermudians, and I look forward to actively watching her achieve all that she is destined to. Recently, I had the honor of representing Bermuda at the Global Educator Leaders Partnership, or GELP, a gathering of ministers, system leaders, and change agents in education from every continent around the world, where I was invited to address the participants and present what we are doing to education reform here in Bermuda. In preparing for that event, I had the opportunity to reflect on the last 5 years since being elected, and specifically the last 30 months, where we have invested dedicated resources and effort to reform public education. Without a doubt, there is much to celebrate. The most recent being the opening of the signature learning programs at Cedar Bridge Academy and the Barclay Institute, recognizing the magnificent work undertaken by the many involved to get us to this point. But it goes much further than that. During these last 5 years, we've seen our pre-primary and middle schools be outfitted with fiber optic internet connections to increase bandwidth and the installation of Wi-Fi throughout, creating educational opportunities for Bermudians to attend a Bermuda college or overseas institutions can be seen in programs like the $300,000 grant and financial aid in partnership with Bermuda College introduced in 2017. The College Promise program introduced in 2019, in which any graduate of a Bermuda public school high school with a GPA of 3.0 or greater attends the Bermuda College tuition free. Our scholarships and awards budget has grown from under $1 million to just over $1.4 million to support overseas schooling. Programs within the BPSS, like the introduction of an ASD program at the preschool level that has expanded opportunities for Bermudian students. The Bright Start program, which has reduced the financial burden on parents from having to pay for childcare for their 3-year-old while giving our students an even earlier start on their academic journey. Competitions like the now annual Father's Day essay competition and the Father Speak series that have given male parents a spotlight that simply wasn't there before. The introduction of STEAM and math intervention programs in our primary schools that are showing positive results. In 2020, despite the onset of COVID-19 and the challenges it brought to our education system, we continue to move forward with our education reform agenda, a bit slightly changed due to COVID. The hiring of Innovation Unit as our change partners has helped guide our forward movement in a methodical and purposeful way. The establishment of governance, learning first, and system redesign teams introduce our educators, education leaders, parents, students, community, and industry partners to the concept of co-design. This was a means for all of our stakeholders to have a say on how our system would be designed for the future. Thousands of hours have been spent amongst the hundreds of persons on various teams to get us to the point of introducing signature schools at the Barkley Institute and Cedar Bridge Academy. The introduction of financial and insurance services along with health and social care signatures at the Barkley Institute and STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, along with trades and professional signatures at Cedar Bridge Academy marked the start of a new era of education in Bermuda. We passed legislation in March 2021 to allow for the phasing out of middle schools in favor of signature senior schools and completed the parish primary school consultation in June 2021. All of this work that has come before laid the foundation for signature schools to open in September 2022, but there is still much work left to do. In fact, it was in March 2022, some 6 months before the opening of our signature schools, we announced we were beginning the work necessary to have our first parish primary schools open in September 2023. The schools chosen are Francis Patton Primary and Purvis Primary. In this upcoming legislative session, we will bring the necessary legislation forward that will allow for a P7 and P8 class to be added to these schools. Over the last 6 months, we have selected, inducted, and onboarded school transformation teams for the new parish primary schools, which will be on the sites of Francis Patton and Purvis Primary, and the new signature school, which will introduce hospitality and tourism, as well as education services signature learning for S1 students in September 2023. In addition to continuing to support the implementation of the current signature learning programs at Cedar Bridge Academy and the Barkley Institute, we have also expanded the transformative work being undertaken at our existing signature schools to develop the S2 curriculum and learning experiences for both signatures, spreading the new advisory curriculum to S1 through S4, and begun work on some of the core curriculum, specifically math and science. All school transformation teams have been out and about in the community since school return, socializing the blueprints for learning they have developed and the vision they have for transformation of their schools. I was able to visit almost all of these sessions, and one thing is clear: this is the change Bermuda has been asking for. In order to achieve this, the 5 transformation teams, Francis Patton, Purvis Primary, Barkley, the Barkley Institute, Cedar Bridge Academy, and the new signature school, have been supported to build their capabilities, not only to change processes like co-design, but also to the new models of teaching, learning, and assessment that we are beginning to introduce across our schools. Many further opportunities will exist in the coming months to get involved in the exciting, ambitious work, and I encourage everyone involved to get involved. You may not realize the difference even 5 minutes of your time will make. This brings me to our work, which is less focused on the day-to-day relationship between our most precious resource, our children and young people, and their educators and school leaders, to another critical relationship, the one our system has with schools. As we have been clear from the beginning, the goal of education reform is to reorient the Department of Education to be even more nurturing and empowering in order to sustain the transformation of our schools. To achieve this, a number of legislative changes have already been made, but that is just the beginning. Just as we want our educators to empower and nurture our children, we so need our system to empower and nurture our educators, principals, and our schools. We need a system that moves from being directive and models that have worked for us previously to models of public management, models that cradle and enables and puts children first and at the center of everything that we do. Work has been underway to develop the policies, procedures, and practices in areas like educator professional learning, graduation, and partnerships with businesses, industry, and community, to name a few. In this school year, work has been initiated on inclusivity and cultural responsiveness and school leadership development, and work will accelerate on school choice and admissions and learning environments, including how we use time, technology, and space facilities across the island. It is only when these policies, procedures, and practices are consistently embedded across all schools in the island, we will be confident we have conditions in place to not only make the changes now, but make them stick, to learn that we are continuing and to continue to evolve as a school system. Equally important to celebrate what we have achieved has been the opportunity to identify what we have learned and what we can do better. The work of transforming outcomes for children and young people, not only unprecedented in education circles in Bermuda, this level of whole system change is unprecedented in the public service in Bermuda. Like our work to reform the health system, we know that the work is critical to the success and prosperity of our nation. So now is the time to strengthen our resolve. We will always look at what we are doing to improve our processes, how we can increase our efforts, and where possible, how we can accelerate the work. In short, the government is increasing our commitment and investment to ensure we have the right people in place to govern, lead, and deliver education reform for Bermuda. As a result of our own examination of our operations, there are changes that key stakeholders and the community can expect to see in order to progress our education reform. First of these is a new governance committee. As we prepare to introduce an education authority, we are increasing the independence and decision-making authority of the committee governing education reform. I am delighted to announce the refreshed governance committee will be co-chaired by myself and Mr. Philip Butterfield, chair of Bermuda First. Other members of the Reform Governance Committee will be the Permanent Secretary of Education, to which I welcome Ms. Jasmine Smith to the role as the part of the changes announced by the head of the Public Services last week. The Commissioner of Education, the lead of the Education Reform Unit, a representative from the Education Authority Working Group, and representatives of the Innovation Unit. The second change you will see as of next week is the newly formed Education Reform Unit to replace what was formerly known as Learning First Team. The Education Reform Unit will reside in the Ministry of Education's office, reporting to the Office of the Minister of Education. A group of experienced Bermudian education professionals will be released from all other duties to focus solely on our ambitious but critical agenda. This team will continue to be supported by our global education partners, Innovation Unit, with government recently extending the contract with them for an additional 12 months. While the education reform units are transitioning into the team, I am delighted to announce Ms. Lisa De Silva, a well-respected education veteran with over 25 years experience in education in Bermuda, is taking up the helm to lead the education reform unit. We look forward to her guidance and leadership as she works to ensure the team works collaboratively towards the same goal. Our previous governance structure was successful in getting us where we are today. However, reviewing our work during the last 30 months and talking to all involved, we agreed to revise the governance and that the people working on education reform on a day-to-day basis needed to be able to focus solely on that job alone. I'm delighted with the progress made over the last few weeks. With Innovation Unit back on island to work alongside the Education Reform Unit, we are poised to continue the exciting and highly collaborative work that has been underway since March 2020. The formation of an education authority has always been part of the government's education reform. The key element of any education reform is establishing system governance arrangements that are fit for purpose and fit for the future. Plan 2022 recognized this in calling for a review of the current arrangements, and Bermuda First called for the introduction of our education authority in their 2019 Future State report. There needs to be good governance to sustain and support reform, governance that is not subject to day-to-day political interference, governance that has the independence to be flexible and agile in assuring the needs of Bermuda's children, economy, and community are best and efficiently served. We need to move away from our current and seemingly subconscious philosophy of a system of schools to a collaborative school system, a system that supports each young person to be the best they can be, follow their passions and interests, build on their talents and capabilities, and achieve their aspirations. An equitable system in which all schools achieve excellence while having their own ethos and culture. A system whose governance reflects the philosophy, their approach, and the pedagogy of a system as a whole. Governance which is based on and learns from the governance of successful 21st century learning systems. Governance arrangements that hold schools to account, but are supportive and enabling, not directing and controlling. Since establishing the Education Authority Working Group in 2021, steady progress has been made collecting data and meeting with the relevant stakeholders to start to formulate what the eventual Education Authority could look like. In the coming months, more meetings between the relevant stakeholders and the working group will be held to progress the formation of the authority. As stated in the throne speech, we will advance a bill to start the creation of the Education Authority in this legislative session. As an African proverb says, we stand tall because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. As we move forward with education reform, we recognize that we are walking in paths that have been tread by those that came before us, our parents, our grandparents, educators, political and community leaders. Their effort to develop Bermuda that we live in today have created opportunities for us to continue to improve Bermuda so we can make our nation better so that all can thrive within our community. From lived experiences, discussion with family members, concerns of constituents, and prior debates, we know that our country's history is a difficult and painful one, especially for those of our parents' and our grandparents' generations. It is rich with examples of great history of buildings and trades, seafaring and shipbuilding, and developing and shaping young minds and leaders. However, it is a painful and difficult history of racial segregation, separate and unequal schools, and class stratification. Along with my predecessors, I recognize that decisions have been made in decades past that continue to have profound implications on our current and former students of the Bermuda public school system and the Bermuda society. Many members know about the vital history of schools such as the Bermuda Technical Institute, Howard Academy, Warwick Secondary School, Prospect for Girls, the Robert Crawford School, and others that have been closed and repurposed. During the recent consultation on parish primary schools, I was reminded again about these critical issues and the need to teach, learn, know, understand, and appreciate our educational history and legacy. In addition to listening and reading the numerous submissions from community members, I have received many messages of support and met directly with community members passionate about protecting and preserving the history and legacy of schools. As a result, the History and Legacy Working Group was formed with the remit to provide a report on how we can record and preserve the rich and powerful history of education in Bermuda. Having received this report, the key recommendation to establish a History and Legacy Committee with statutory responsibilities will be acted upon in this legislative session. I look forward to the critically important work of this committee, that this committee will be charged with, and encourage the community to be prepared to assist them when called upon. In conclusion, this government's commitment to Bermuda's children and young people hasn't changed. Our dual purpose agenda remains the same. One would have heard of the 3 R's of education: reading, writing, and arithmetic. These important pillars do not go away, and the Department of Education will continue to support each and every teacher and leader in schools across the nation to focus on the children we have in the classrooms right now. In addition to this, the talented teams of professionals from within and beyond the educational sector taking up roles in the Education Reform Unit will be focused on the future and our 6 R's of education reform: reconceptualizing how systems in schools are governed with the introduction of an education authority, reorienting the Department of Education to be more nurturing and empowering to sustain our schools' transformation, redesigning models of learning, teaching, schooling, and introducing parish primary and signature schools by phasing out middle schools over the next 5 to 7 years, refreshing and building where necessary the physical infrastructure of our schools, re-engaging stakeholders and the community in what we know is everyone's business, and importantly, remembering the history and legacy of education in Bermuda. I began my statement today by discussing the opportunity to be at the Global Educator Leaders Partnership recently. It was both affirming and challenging experience. It was affirming to know that we are not alone on this journey. Many countries across the world are engaged in similar transformation efforts, big countries and small countries, high performance countries, and those that have room for improvement. Everyone agreed that the models of schooling that may have worked in the past are insufficient should we generally want to help our young people develop skills, knowledge, values, and relationships that will enable them to access and be creators of the jobs of the future, to be active citizens, and to tackle increasingly complex challenges. And challenging in a way that we cannot shy away from the reality that reform does not happen overnight. It will take several years for us to have established and developed all 10 parish primary schools and have put in place all 10 signature learning programs and our signature schools, for exceptionalities, and for alternative education to realize the vision for learning. This work is not optional or something that is nice to have. As remarked in the speech from the throne, education remains the most significant priority of this government. We will proceed incrementally and in a measured way. We will continue to act with intent, and every step of the way, not everything will be right the first time, but we will learn from our mistakes and ride the discomforts that major change inevitably brings. Why? Because our children, our future, deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education. Members of the media, extensive information shared by the Premier and by the Minister of Education regarding the Burt speech. This is the opportunity for you to field a few questions on behalf of your new organizations. I think I indicated that we would start with Mr. Connolly. Mr. Connolly, do you have a few questions for the Premier or the Minister?
Good afternoon, Sean. How are you today?
I've got some questions for the Education Minister, but
You're fine. We can go back and forth. Don't worry. We are here for a throne speech press conference. Go ahead.
an interesting part of the whole speech was the study of self-governance, which was revealed. Why did you commission that report? Specifically, when did you commission that report? And why did you keep it quiet, secret?
I do not recall when the report was commissioned. That was under the Attorney General and the Minister of Legal Affairs and Constitutional Reform, so she can certainly provide a better answer for that. But the question is why? I think, and I'm sure not only you or other persons may have questions regarding this, and I think that it's, if we look at the words from the throne speech that almost speak to the fact that in Bermuda, we cannot have mature conversations about self-governance, about modifying our constitutional arrangements in progress, which are things which are mandated under the United Nations charters. And so from that perspective, I think that it is interesting that we always boil down anytime anything is mentioned about alternate constitutional arrangements. It creates this firestorm of controversy and criticism. Here's what I will say. The conversations will continue to happen because it is necessary and right for all persons to understand what are the options for their government. And it is important to note that as UN, the United Nations resolutions have indicated that all administering powers should be working towards self-governance for their individual territories. That is the United Nations dictate. That is not a Bermuda dictate. That is United Nations dictate. The report itself is a very long one. I have not had the ability to read the entire thing. I've managed to skim over it. The Attorney General has managed to read the thing. It will be going to Cabinet soon, and it will be shared with the public soon. But I think what's the most important thing about that is to note that it is about educating the citizens of this country. Every time we speak about self-governance, every time we speak about change in constitutional arrangements, it breaks down into, back and forth on things which don't necessarily reflect the reality. And if we're going to have a serious conversation in this country, as all overseas territories are having, as the UK government asks territories to look at their constitutional changes, which they may or may not wish to have, and as we continue to report to the United Nations on an annual basis as required under UN resolutions on the progress and steps which are being taken towards self-governance, I think that it makes sense to have a comprehensive report that is produced that can be shared so that persons can actually know, understand, discuss what self-governance means, what does this entail, what does the United Nations have that is laid out in so far as its resolutions about working towards self-government, what Bermuda is doing in that regard, what other jurisdictions do in that area, and I think it will be helpful as a document to discuss. But on the pure basis of it, I just want to return to just three very fundamental points that govern this entire discussion regarding self-governance. First is that it is the current position of the Bermuda Progressive Labour Party, who is the government, that upon Bermuda becoming a sovereign state, at whatever point in time we may become a sovereign state, that will become full members of the Commonwealth, retain the United Kingdom's monarch of head of state, and retain the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council as the highest court in the land. It's also important to know, I know this before you got here, that during the 2020 general election campaign, I reiterated the fact that in order for Bermuda to become a sovereign state, it would require a referendum of voters to approve any changes to our Constitution. And thirdly, as I stated during that election campaign, a referendum on sovereignty is not planned for this current parliament. But that does not mean that we cannot discuss and educate the populace on issues related to self-government. And that is what the intention of the report was. Rather than have the same wholesale arguments, let's commission something that is done by an international expert that is recognized in this area for all persons to see, read, and to digest.
Okay, Mr. Premier, yes, again, why didn't you tell anybody that this was happening until now? How much did the study cost? And is this really the trigger for the independence referendum in the next parliament?
But see, you're going right there again to talk about the independence referendum of the next parliament and all that. No, I did not. I said that it is not planned for this current parliament. And I think what is important to note, if there's one thing that you know from the Progressive Labour Party, what we set out in our election manifestos are the things which we work towards achieving. You will find no mention of that inside of our election manifesto. And that is the reason why I wanted to make sure I came back to that particular point, because the minute anyone mentions the word sovereignty, mentions it, it sets off a firestorm over on Parleville Road in the Royal Gazette offices, sets off a firestorm over the music box, because we understand the One Bermuda Alliance wants to talk about independence all the time. The fact is, we are a mature jurisdiction. The United Nations resolutions have stated that all administering powers should work towards self-government for all of their territories that do not have full self-government. We report on an annual basis to the United Nations on this. So does the United Kingdom government do this. We commission a report so we can have a fulsome discussion, a fulsome understanding of where Bermuda stands. That report, when it is done, will be shared with the cabinet, not when it's done. When it is ready to be shared, it will be shared with the cabinet, and it will be shared with the country. The report is finished. I have managed to not look at the entirety of the report, as I said. The cabinet has not yet seen the report. It will be shared, and I'm sure it will be discussed in Parliament. And I'm certain, Mr. Connolly, that you and everyone else will have the opportunity to read all 200 and something pages of it and to comment and to discuss it.
You're a former tourist minister, obviously. The changes in the throne speech that were announced, giving the tourism minister greater discretion. I mean, is that a shock to developers? How's that going to work?
I think that when the Minister of Tourism has his press conference, either later this week or next week, he can certainly expand on that. But I don't think that there's any particular surprise when we talk about tourism investment and to make sure that we are providing concessions which are competitive with other jurisdictions. We've seen other jurisdictions. I know your newspaper loves to compare us to the Cayman Islands all the time. And you're in the Cayman Islands, there's 25 years of tax concessions. And we talk about all the hotel developments they have there and the airlines here, yet we in this country fight over 10 or 15 years. I mean, it's quite plain and simple that if you want to make sure to attract tourism investment, just like in any way, shape, or form, if you want to attract investment, you have to be competitive. These are things that I had signaled previously that there'll be changes to the Tourism Investment Act. It is going to take place in this particular parliament. That was the reason why I was included in the throne speech. And I'm certain the Minister of Tourism will certainly speak more of that when he has his press conference in the upcoming days.
As Finance Minister, is this greater discretion for developers connected to the proposed GenCom deal?
Oh, I don't think it has. There is a separate act of parliament that has already been passed without objection in the parliament for those 15-year tax concessions. So I think it's important that that is noted. But on a broader level, it cannot be that we're doing individual acts of parliament for every single development. That is the reason why there was the Hotel Concessions Act from 1998. That is the reason why we upgraded it to the Tourism Investment Act. But the fact is that Bermuda is not competitive when it comes to attracting hotel investment. It is just not. Those are the facts. Whether you speak to the BTA, whether or not you speak to the Bermuda Hotel Association, whether or not you speak to international partners, whether or not you speak to the Caribbean Tourism Organization, they will tell you Bermuda is not competitive when it comes to attracting tourism investment dollars. And so what we have to do is to say, if we have an economic recovery plan, if we know that we need to make sure that we have more investment in tourism, we want to make sure that our tourism investment landscape is competitive to attract investment, because over time, hotels that are operating 24/7, that support airlift, that support the economy, the concessions which are offered, the tax revenue that comes from operating hotels far exceeds concessions. That has been recognized in jurisdictions around the world, and it is recognized by this government, and it will be advanced in this parliamentary session by the minister responsible for tourism.
On tourism, Gencom, you've been saying since April the 1st, if I remember rightly, that the deal is imminent. How close are we now? Is it a week? Is it going to be before Christmas? When?
I will tell you that it would be any particular range into what you say, but let me give it this way. We are still working through the closing documentation. Nothing has changed from the previous aspects of which I've given. Certainly global market conditions continue to be challenging, but we have the same confidence that I have that this project will open in 2024. It is unfortunate that the project is not being constructed now. When this project came to the government in 2021, if we would have been able to complete it during that time period, construction would have been happening. Since then, of course, we've had a war, we've had global inflation, we have different challenges, but we are working towards closing. And I still have every confidence that this project will close and will open in 2024.
Social insurance. The changes could be quite extensive, actually, that you're proposing, the sliding scale. Could that be, negative to people who can't pay as much in as other people?
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that the social insurance changes are similar to the social insurance changes from your home country, the United Kingdom, which were made many, many, many years ago. I mean, every social insurance system in the world that was set up under the UK model had the same contributions for everyone, regardless how much they made. But in the United Kingdom, I think that was changed in the 70s or 80s. In Canada, that was changed a long time ago. It's just that Bermuda is this outlier where the person, the store, I always say that the cashier who's making $40,000 a year at a local store is paying the exact same amount for the person making $400,000 a year who owns the store. That doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Very few places still have that level. And the spaces where we model our legislation from, when you look at the UK, we look at Canada or other jurisdictions which have Westminster-style governments, those have changed to a proportion of earnings. And so from that perspective, we will do that. And the projections are that, for instance, if you take someone who will make above the soon-to-be minimum wage of $18 an hour, a person on a scale where they're paying as a percentage of their income versus a fixed rate will see their take-home pay increase by $720 a year. Recognize this government has done significant work in boosting the take-home pay for working persons. So whether it is through the reduction of payroll tax, whether it's the plan to eliminate payroll tax for those persons making under $48,000 a year, or whether it is talking about this change, which is something that we have promised, which unfortunately has not yet been delivered, but will be delivered in this legislative session to increase take-home pay for working people. That's where this government has always been focused, and we have a strong record of delivery on increasing the take-home pay for low-wage workers.
Okay, so before I move on to the Minister, who's been very patient, I'd just like to ask, this is your first throne speech since the PLP election. Your former party leader and Premier, Alex Scott, after your victory, he said that you had to come across less like an autocrat. Do you value Mr. Scott's opinion, and how do you feel about what he said?
I value everyone's opinion. I don't know particularly what he said specifically, as I know the Royal Gazette has a habit of taking quotes out of context. So, and I haven't spoken, I will just say, I know that the Royal Gazette has a habit of taking quotes out of context. So that's perfectly fine. That's your opinion. I can have mine as well.
That's actually factual.
That's okay. You can have yours as well. But the fact is, the Royal Gazette has a history of taking quotes out of context. So I'm not entirely certain what he did say. Let me put it this way. I value the opinion of anyone who's had to serve in the high pressure role as leader of a political party and as leader of a government. But the fact is, the cabinet I lead knows the facts of that, the whole issue of autocratic nature, et cetera. We have a cabinet style government. We have a government where I am first amongst equals, yet all ministers have the opportunity to change views and policies and advance the matters in their own particular ministries. And so, though whatever he would have said, what I will say is what's important for the people of this country to know is that their premier is listening, that their ministers are listening. And if you look at the throne speech, one of the main items in there, when I was on the highways and byways of this country, childcare is something that is hurting and impacting a lot of families. We all know the issues of the costs of living that are happening during global inflation. And what people want is a government that has strong leadership to respond to those concerns, but one that is also listening to their concerns. But we have a strong and vibrant democracy, and there is no autocracy in Bermuda. Happy to defer to the Minister of Education.
Yes, I do.
Minister
but-
of Education.
As a political editor of 27 years, I can say I always report facts, and so does the Royal Gazette.
Questions for the Education Minister.
Mr. Minister, could I just ask you, the Education Authority, I know you say it's in development, it's still evolving. Would you like it to see it be fully independent?
It is the term independent is a misnomer that I think is thrown out, or a red herring that's thrown out. It cannot be fully independent because it will always be funded by the government. And because there are rules in place that require that those funds be accounted for, there will always be a connection to the government. However, I do intend for the legislative framework to be put in place that prevents the changing of the direction that the education professionals and the like that will be in place decide that is the direction that education needs to go into. So I look at it as the same way we have the Bermuda College operating as a Quango with its own board, and they have self-determination. They meet with the minister once a quarter and to discuss their aspirations and their forward planning, but there is very little input or very little interference from the government. So it's something that already exists in Bermuda and is working very well. If we talk about the Bermuda College and all of the good things that it has been doing over the last couple of years, we can just take that as an example of how it can work and how it can work very efficiently and effectively.
If it's not independent, then, I mean, how much authority are you going to let the authority have?
As I just explained, it will be an authority that's put in place to control the direction and the development of education in Bermuda.
If you have an education authority, do you need an education minister?
Yes, you do.
Why?
Because the Ministry of Education is in charge, has the remit of looking at education throughout Bermuda. That includes public and private, and developing the direction that education goes into, and coming up with the rules and regulations around it. We can both perfectly coexist with an education authority running the day-to-day operations of the public school education.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Conley. Ms. Costa.
And Mr. Rabain said that you say that, Mr. Well, start with your.
A wonderful,
Is this a public school?
Exactly.
I must say.
Been very involved in all this stuff which we're doing.
And congratulations to your son at West Pembroke.
Yes, and yes, my daughter just got a prefect there, so.
Yes, congratulations.
So, one of the things I just want to piggyback on, Shona, I'm not sure if I heard correctly. When it comes to the education authority's independence, will the government still select roles on the education authority, or how independent will it be in terms of who sits on it?
Well, Gary, as I spoke here, we are in the process of developing how the boards will be established, how they will be selected. And so once that is finalized, and of course that's talking with our stakeholders as well, we have quite a few people that need to be discussed. We have 3 unions that are part of education. We have aided schools, we have maintained schools, we have educators, we have educator leaders, we have the Department of Education. So these are multiple persons that we have to have these types of conversations with. And once those plans are firm and finalized, we will be having subsequent updates on that.
So that's not clear yet. Are you expecting that you'll have a certain amount of authority on perhaps who's the chair of the board or the CEO of the authority?
What I am expecting is that the board will be appointed by consummate professionals who will carry education forward in the best way it needs to be carried to ensure that our children get the best out of what they need out of our education system.
Now, as this progresses along, this reform, now that you have your 2 signature schools, your first parish primary school, how are you going to be measuring the success before you progress? You talked about learning from our mistakes. Obviously, anything in transition, there's going to be bumps along the road. So how are you going to monitor it? Might it change your course? What's in place for that?
Well, Gary, as I said, nothing is perfect, and we know that we're going to have some bumps in the road, and we're going to make mistakes as we move forward. The key is to have those metrics in place. Currently, when you look at our education reform pathway, we have, I believe it's 26 work groups. One of those is metrics and assessment. And so those are the people who are developing how we do measure the success of everything that we do. So it's currently in place to do that.
Will that be shared? Will we get those metrics so we can see, okay, this bit's working, this bit needs a little work? Well,
Gary, the purpose of co-design is to continuously involve the public in what it is that we do and how we move forward.
take that as a yes, we'll get to know. Should I? Okay. There is some resistance to some aspects of changes. The West End Warriors campaign against the closure of, or proposed closure of West End Primary, stating it is easier access for students. Somerset Primary is a flood zone. These are some of the arguments they've made. They've submitted a party request on their questions. When do you anticipate a response to that?
Well, Gary, as you would know, that ministers don't know about petty requests.
So you have no. Can you comment on your response to those issues?
I certainly can.
Warriors are coming
Gary, what we did is we undertook an exercise to use the same criteria to judge every single primary school campus. And I think it's very important for people to hear that word, campus, the actual property that our primary schools exist on. We took we analyzed each campus the same way, and they were scored. Each campus within a particular parish that scored the highest was selected to be redeveloped into the parish primary school. So when we hear that West End is closing, Somerset Primary is staying open, that is again a red herring. What we are doing is opening a new parish primary school on the site of the best place to have one in that parish. And it's been put out there on numerous occasions. We can call it West End Primary, because West End Primary has been located in about 4 different locations in its history. This would just be another step in that history.
And one of the things that has been notable about this period of time is we have seen, or appear to have seen, a number of teachers, public school teachers, who've been withdrawn out of the system into this reform program, and then substitutes coming in. Is there a risk that there's a little bit of compromise to the current system and the current education of students while trying to get this reform underway?
Gary, unfortunately, one of the things, and this was something that was a big topic at GELP, is at the Global Education Leadership, is massive reform such as this cannot be done without disruption. And there is disruption. What our job is to do is to minimize that disruption as much as we can. One of the things that we have recognized is we can't continue to have persons trying to do their teaching job and doing this at the same time. So instead of continuing along that path, we're pulling people out completely and replacing them with someone who can be there on a sustained basis. So we can have that stability that you're talking about that we might not have been seeing previously. So that's how we're looking at what we're doing and how we can improve as we move forward.
But in a sense, are you also going to be monitoring that? Do you have some statistics on what's happening right now with the disruption to students at this time?
Well, it's not so much the disruption of students, and believe it or not, Gary, our educators are very affected by this as well, because they don't want to be away from their students. They don't like the fact of, I'm in here 3 days a week, I'm out 2 days a week. It's either I'm out completely and someone's there consistently, and so we can have that continuity. So that's what we're looking to do. We're also looking to bring in things like stipends for a person so they can work after work instead of during their work week. So we're looking at what we've done over the last 30 months and looking on how we can improve. And there are lots of other options that have come up that once again takes into account what is best for our children. Because at the end of the day, everything that we do, everything that we say, and everything that we move forward in has to take into account what is best for our students and what is best to make sure that they continuously get the attention that they need.
Thank you, Minister Gary. Our time is dwindling down.
Okay.
Do you have some questions for the
If I may, move to the Premier then. Just touching on the social insurance reform, you said it's expected this session. Are we going to see it go before the House before Christmas?
This session is this parliamentary session, so that parliamentary session ends most likely in September 2023.
If you want to rush it?
This is certainly not something that can be rushed. As I said, there is a lot of work that has been done on social insurance, looking at the various challenges of social insurance to make sure that social insurance is stable into the future. And so those are all the discussions which have been had about, changes to the eligibility age for social insurance, all those things which have been previously discussed by the former Minister of Finance, myself as well. So all those matters. But there's a specific part about this, which is the changing in the structure, because as we are living in a time of increasing global inflation, where the government must do all it can to make sure to increase the purchasing powers of low-wage earners, this is why this is being particularly singled out as it's something that is important. And as I said with the example, this is taking from the 2015 budget reply that I delivered when I was the shadow minister of finance. If you take the median income and if you go ahead and adjust persons below that and everyone be at the same percentage rate, there was an estimated percentage rate of 2.75% at that point in time. You'll see that low wage earners will save $720 a year. And so that is, that is significant. That is significant additional money in people's pockets when added to the amount of reduction in taxes that those low wage earners have had under this government. You're talking about a significant extra amount of money each year.
So could we, in fact, be seeing this move as a test run even for income tax?
I wouldn't say so. I don't think I don't think there's any particular comparison on that level. I mean, what we're talking about is a percentage of income for social insurance, which is the same as they have in the United Kingdom, same as they have in Canada, same as they have in the United States, same as they have just about everywhere. Bermuda is just one of the few countries that are left that never changed their initial social insurance system from one of fixed rate contributions to one that's a percentage of income.
Since we're being told we're short on time, I do
Go
want
ahead,
to
ask away.
move on to Morgan's point.
Morgan's point, real quick, because I think I tackled all your questions on sovereignty. Lay that out very detailed.
I may have one or two, but I do want to touch on Morgan's point. Government in 2019, 2020 took control of some of the assets when they took over and paid back the 165 million in loans to the lenders.
That's not exactly correct. The government did not take control of the assets because the assets were under a joint provisional liquidator. What the government had to do was to fulfill the guarantee. The transfer of the assets is to happen under the establishment of this company, so the assets can finally be transferred. So the assets are still under the control of the joint provisional liquidator.
So at this time, nothing has been gained back in terms of funds on that 165 or whatever.
The only thing that has been gained is we had to spend more money to make sure that we keep up the property, which will eventually come into our space, because the last thing we want it to be depreciate to the point where it cannot be used.
Okay, and I understand at the time there was an offer by an investor to pay the debt, and that they would therefore receive the 165 guarantee. It wouldn't be paid out to them, but they would have the guarantee to them, and under that agreement they would have all the assets. It wouldn't be under a liquidator. What I want to know is the original developers, Brian Duperreau, Nancy Duperreau, Andy Burrows, do they still have the lease on that area?
It depends on what area. It's a very complex site.
Yeah.
The area, unfortunately, Morgan's Point, there's a significant amount of land that is there. Unfortunately, the former government, under the guarantee, did not tie the entire site to the guarantee. So there's only a small portion of that entire site that is part of the guarantee, which is where the buildings were built. But for instance, the peninsula and other areas are not covered by the guarantee. Those were put under a different corporate structure. And that means that the only access which we have is the lands that were covered by the guarantee. So it would be different if we were taking back the entire peninsula, but we are not. Those things are still under the control of other parties.
Okay, so I was wondering if you repealing the 2014 Act will impact the current leaseholders at all. Will some of the leases have to end?
There may be some impacts. I'm happy to discuss that when we get further to the bill actually being tabled and the final bill after it goes to the cabinet and then to the parliament. But what we do need to do is move forward. So that is an act that is there that is not necessarily still needed to be in place. There is no resort that is being built there. That's it. And we need to go ahead and tidy those things up, take the laws that are no longer needed out of the books, and put in place a company to manage the site.
Are you foreseeing that perhaps all the building that's happened now, will nothing happen to that?
I'm happy to share that plan with you in the future after it has been finalized and approved by the cabinet. But until that point in time, I cannot get ahead of my cabinet colleagues.
But are we,
Because contrary to popular belief, I don't rule by dictate. I have to make sure that the cabinet approves anything. So once the cabinet has approved, then we'll be able to share that with the country.
but when it comes to these leases that the developers have, is there a chance we could end up paying out more to get out of those leases?
Oh, well, let's put it this way. The guarantee was $165 million, and to date we've paid over 210. It is incredibly expensive. It is incredibly upsetting. Every single time I think of what the government could have done with $210 million extra dollars. We heard the Minister of Education talk about new parish primary schools and the investment in which we need to make in schools. We hear the things and the challenge of the senior citizens inside of this country, the different upgrades which we have to do, the systems, when it comes to capital upgrades, et cetera. It is incredibly upsetting every single time I have to think of this and think of the fact that as an opposition, we oppose this measure stringently. We said that we should not be putting this guarantee up. It is not the right way to go. This is not the end of everything on the project that was not fully funded, on a deal, a company, a group of people that, with the greatest respect, had no experience in hotel development. And look where we are. It was a project that was in default prior to us even coming into office. It is a shame and a travesty. So it is a significant amount of money, and I'm certain there will be more money spent. But where we want to get to is to make sure that there is the greatest return on all of those funds that are spent back to the taxpayers of this country.
It was the choice of this government to take on to pay out on the guarantee. When there was apparently a choice with another investor. What do you say to those people right now, looking a couple of years on? Why did you not?
Can I just be very clear? If there was actually another investor that was willing to take over the property, I'm sure the government would not have exercised the choice. I'm not going to get into those particular details, and it was not a choice. It was a guarantee that was called by the lenders. That is not a choice. When the government signs a contract, you must go back, or you must execute that and hold up your end of the bargain, or else the country will be in a worse state.
The form of
One final question, because we are running out of time.
The former finance minister did say, when reporting on paying out on this guarantee, that there had been an investor indicated they would essentially pay the guarantee. They would take, as long as they got a government guarantee. What I'm saying is, what do you say to the people that right now might think, oh, well, why didn't you go down that route, since we really have got nowhere so far with what Morgan's point.
So what I can say is I'm not familiar with those specific details, what you're saying. If you said that's what the former Minister of Finance said, I'm going to take your word on that aspect. But what I would say is that no government would voluntarily and willingly just try to borrow $200 million that we don't have to borrow.
Thank you, members of the media. Thank you, Mr. Premier. Thank you, Mr. Minister. That concludes today's press briefing.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful afternoon. Hope you all